In college, I was in a band called Stained Glass. It was a band associated with my church denomination. We began the summer rehearsing in Southern California. We recorded an album in the Bay Area of California, and then we toured the country, a grueling 2+ months crossing the country until we reached our denomination's annual conference in West Virginia. I can't remember how many concerts we did in that tour, but I think it was at least 30. It was exhausting. Partway through our tour, we had a long stint in Colorado. And that was a turning point for me in my relationship with prayer. Every evening, I would go out on the deck, kneel down, and pray. It became a routine. I'd disappear from the rest of the group, get outside, and get alone with God. When we made it to Wisconsin, I had my own apartment to myself, and I remember feeling this elation of getting alone and just conversing with God in that room. When I went back to college in the fall, that habit of secluding myself and praying died out. Partly because it's challenging when you live with a roommate in a loud dorm. I remember talking to a friend about my prayer life and saying how much I missed that connection with God that I had during my summer in the band. She asked, "Why don't you just get back into the habit of doing it?" Why don't we? Why does it seem like prayer is so hard? Hi, this is Justin Hibbard, and you're listening to Why Catholic, my podcast about the what and why of Catholicism. Today we're beginning a new series on prayer. While many of these episodes will resonate with all Christians, I do want to focus on the Catholic approach to prayer. Now, before we dive in, let me offer a big thank you to those who are supporters of Why Catholic. I am eternally grateful to you. And if you benefit from this podcast, I'd ask that you prayerfully consider becoming a patron, whether that's being a monthly supporter or purchasing something from the Why Catholic Etsy store. Links are in the show notes. I want to make a confession before we begin this series on prayer. I am not an expert on prayer. In fact, I am one who has constantly struggled with having a disciplined prayer life. If you know my story, you know that I spent 11 years as an evangelical pastor, and I have to admit that I didn't have a disciplined prayer life. Studies have shown that Protestant pastors, by and large, neglect prayer. One survey said that the average pastor prays only 7 minutes a day. Another said that 80% of pastors surveyed spend less than 15 minutes a day in prayer. The most generous survey said that pastors pray all of 37 minutes a day. When I became Catholic, I struggled with a couple of things related to prayer. First, I struggled like I had in the past to have a disciplined prayer life. And secondly, I struggled with the idea of praying the same prayer every day or repetitive prayers like the rosary. I remember one time early after my conversion, I went to confession. I explained that I was feeling a lot of demonic oppression. My pastor asked me about my prayer life. And in a moment of honesty, I just kind of blurted out that I had really never had a disciplined prayer life. Knowing my background as a Protestant pastor, he was taken aback by this. "Oh, really?" he said. At the time, I didn't know how much priests pray as part of their commitment to their vocation. I didn't realize that part of their vows included praying all of the prayers of the divine office every day. So from one pastor to a former pastor, my lack of prayer discipline was probably very foreign to him. He gave me some suggestions about prayers that I could add to my routine. One of them was St. Bridget's prayers, a series of 15 prayers, which all begin with an Our Father and a Hail Mary, and are reflections on the crucifixion. I went home and for about a week or two made it a habit of doing these prayers. But I also found that I was just trying to get through them. Why is prayer so hard? I know for me personally, I often fall into the common temptation of equating doing things for God with communicating with Him. There's a story in Luke 10 that tells of Jesus attending dinner at the house of Martha with her sister Mary. While Mary was sitting and conversing with Jesus, Martha was left to do all the preparations. Finally, Martha got upset and asked Jesus to tell her sister Mary to give her hand. And Jesus gently rebuked Martha, saying that Mary had chosen to do the better thing. When it comes to my prayer life, my addictive sin is to be like Martha, putting doing things for God over being with Him. When I was a pastor, I would think, let me get working on this sermon. More recently in life, it's been, let me get working on this podcast, or let me do this thing for the church. Those things, while important, are not a substitution for intimacy with God. Why is it so much easier to do things for God than it is to be with God? Some months ago, as I was thinking ahead about my upcoming series for this podcast, I knew I wanted to do a series on the Catholic approach to prayer, and I have to tell you, I was feeling hesitant. Me? Talk about prayer? Just the thought of doing a series like this made me feel like a hypocrite. Then I had a family crisis that completely rocked my world, and I just fell on the floor one night with my face down, and I decided that there were two paths on this journey. One was to completely rely on myself to become bitter and angry and to cope in unhealthy ways. The other was to completely rely on God. Do you ever have those moments in life where you say, that moment or that day really changed me? The day I collapsed in front of God in the midst of this family crisis was a day that changed me. I decided to start a program called Exodus 90. It's a fraternal program geared mainly towards Catholics that includes elements of prayer, fasting, reflection, abstinence from entertainment, alcohol, unnecessary screen time, etc. I prioritize doing the Liturgy of the Hours, specifically seeing the hours, the subject of episode 107, and then I went away on a pilgrimage to Spain and Portugal. There hasn't been a day that has gone by in this season that I haven't prayed. Have I done the Liturgy of the Hours, the Lauds, and the Vespers perfectly? No, but they have become a part of my morning and evening routine. Then something else happened. I haven't been sleeping well since this family crisis began. I often wake up in the middle of the night, and my go-to is my phone, particularly social media. I'd roll over and doom scroll. I was getting frustrated that it didn't seem like I could just sleep through the night. And then I had this premonition. God is trying to break my habit of getting on my phone by cultivating a habit of prayer. So every night when I wake up, I grab my rosary next to my bed, I turn on a rosary podcast, I've put a few of my favorites in the show notes, and I pray along. Many times I don't finish the rosary before I fall back asleep. Sometimes I do finish, and then I just pray another one of the mysteries before finally dozing off. I've come to love something that I have always struggled to love since becoming Catholic: praying the rosary. This season of asceticism, particularly having a disciplined prayer life, has been life-changing. I am convinced it is the only reason I am getting through this devastating life crisis. The pain is still there, but I am just relishing in how it has brought me closer to Jesus and how God is using it to make much needed changes in my life. While prioritizing prayer becomes easier and more natural the more I do it, it doesn't mean that I'm not tempted not to do it. Oh, believe you me, that's not the case. Every morning I still think, I'll do the Liturgy of the Hours later, or I should really do this thing that's important first. Every evening I think, I would rather watch this show, or I'm too tired to pray. There is a constant temptation not to pray. Why is that? Why is prayer so hard? Why are we constantly tempted not to do it? I'd like to take us back into the Garden of Eden just after Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate the fruit. What did they do? They hid from God. They disengaged from Him. They didn't just stop seeking Him out. They purposefully tried to hide from Him. The temptation to neglect prayer, I am convinced, is Satan's most powerful tool. He knows that the second you open up that communication with God, powerful things can happen. So he does everything to keep that from occurring, distracting us with tasks or media or anything to keep us from opening our hearts to God. Ultimately, though, Satan's greatest weapon is shame. If he can get us to think that we have no business praying because we're waist deep in sin, if he can get us to be overwhelmed by how far from God we feel, then he can use our shame to cripple us. We end up hiding in the bushes like Adam and Eve. And the more we neglect prayer, the easier and easier it is to make neglecting prayer our habit. When we go to confession, the priest more often than not will include a penance that is prayer. Pray 5 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys or something of the sort. Why is that? Is prayer a punishment? No, he prescribes prayer because that is the first thing we neglect when we sin. We're off hiding in the bushes, disengaging from God, and prayer is an essential ingredient in restoring that relationship. You have to begin somewhere, and the best place to begin is coming back into communion with God. And how do we do that? We do that through prayer. In this season in life, I've really taken a point to lean on friends, even friends that I haven't talked to in a long time. How did I rekindle that relationship? I sent them a text, I called them, and we made plans to get together. This is the exact same prescription when we are far off from God, but want to draw closer to Him. We just start that communication with Him. As we talk about the Catholic approach to prayer, let me give you some points that I've found to be helpful for what it's worth. First, recognize that you have an enemy, and that enemy is terrified of what will happen if you get close to God. Satan is going to throw everything at you to keep it from happening. Hate him and his manipulation enough to get on your knees and pray. Secondly, start simply. Catholic forms of praying can seem overwhelming to someone just getting started. Wait, you want me to pray the Lauds and the Vespers, and each is like 20 minutes? You want me to pray a rosary, which is like 20 to 25 minutes? What? Praying is like exercising, and when you first start, 20 minutes can seem overwhelming. Start by praying an Our Father, a Hail Mary, and a Glory Be. Graduate to doing a decade of the rosary. You can just start small. Third, rely on resources to help you pray. For example, Exodus 90 has been a huge help for me. Every day there's a reading, a reflection, and some prayer. Part of that prayer is me doing it on my own, and part of it is a guided prayer where I'm praying along. I prefer to pray the rosary by listening while I pray. You also don't have to pray alone. My friend joins a live rosary session on X every night and prays with fellow Christians from all over the world. These tools are just that. They are tools to assist you in getting closer to God. Fourth, use your imagination when you pray. We're going to talk about this in a future episode in this series, but imagination is a powerful component of prayer. There's a difference between imagination and make-believe. Make-believe is pretending something exists that doesn't. Imagination is envisioning the reality that exists that we often cannot see. For example, in Exodus 90, the prayer begins by saying, "Let us remember that we are in the presence of God." Do you see God? Probably not. Can you use your eyes of faith to envision Him being with you? That's what it means to use your imagination in prayer. My fifth suggestion is this. Let God speak into your life. As you give Him time and space, you're going to start hearing little whisperings. These may likely not be audible voices. They'll likely be sentiments of conviction. For example, in a season of my life, I felt God say so many things, like the one I just mentioned. Hey, when you wake up in the middle of the night, pray instead of doom scrolling on your phone. 6. Don't be surprised when you look forward to your prayer time. The more that I pray, the more that I look forward to praying. It's interesting to me that the people who find Mass to be the most boring are the ones that rarely go. The ones who attend Mass every day are ones who can't get enough of it. The more you cultivate a discipline of prayer, the more you will notice that your day seems off when you skip it, and the more you will look forward to actually praying. Let me end with this. I am no expert on prayer. I've historically been one of the least disciplined people when it comes to prayer, but prayer has absolutely changed my life. And if I can learn to rely on prayer to get through my day, anyone can. I've come to realize that prayer is both my lifeblood and my most powerful weapon. I am no match for the prince of this world. I absolutely need to rely on prayer. Prayer is hard, but a life without prayer is impossible. Thank you for joining me for Why Catholic. Be sure to subscribe to Why Catholic wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to my Substack site and get the next episode in your email inbox. As a subscriber, you get a special discount code to the Why Catholic Etsy store. If you've been blessed by this podcast and you're feeling generous, there's also a way to financially support it, and patrons get some extra perks. To become a free subscriber or a patron, just go to whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. Also join me on Instagram at whycatholicpodcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this is Why Catholic. God bless you.